Welcome back to Sacred Arts, where we discuss all things from the practical to the sacred. When I came across Yogi Aaron, I was so intrigued to learn more about why stretching could be killing me. Yogi Aaron is a leading yoga teacher and renowned for his unique view on the drawbacks of stretching and flexibility. He founded the groundbreaking method, Applied Yoga Anatomy and Muscle Activation, AYAMA, AYAMA, and runs the Yogi Club online platform. He's the host of the Stop Stretching podcast, penned books including Autobiography of a Naked Yogi and Stop Stretching, a new yogic approach to master your body and live pain-free. Additionally, he co-owns Blue Osa Yoga Retreat and Spa in Costa Rica, offering global yoga training. Aaron's journey of healing, humor, and passion distinguishes him in the yoga world. Welcome, Yogi Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm so, like I mentioned before, I'm so intrigued on this topic. But before we get into the nitty gritty of that, I kind of want to give listeners a little bit of an overview. I know that you've healed your own chronic pain. Can you share a bit
Yes.
about your personal journey with pain and how it influenced your career's direction?
Yeah. So I, like you, had always believed that stretching was the path to health, the path to, youthfulness, the path to staying fabulous. And if you ever had a problem in the body, you just needed to stretch it out. And so that was why I actually got into yoga, is because I was noticing that my body was tightening up. I was very athletic as a younger person, and I turned to yoga as part of my methodology to stretch those tight muscles, specifically like hamstrings and back and that sort of thing. And right away, as soon as I started stretching, I actually had hurt myself really bad. And it took me about 20 something years to figure out the connection between stretching and how I hurt myself. She really hurt my back. And I then, because I hurt my back, stretched more, which then ended up hurting my back more, which then led me to stretching more. Yoga teacher after yoga teacher I went to had no idea what was going on with me. Their solution, of course, was you got to keep stretching. You got to keep doing the practice. One day the practice is going to reveal itself. And and of course, I being a yoga teacher, that's what I taught. And it sort of all culminated. I won't get into the whole nitty gritty of my pain journey because it's a long one unless you have a specific question. But it all kind of culminated around 6 years ago when I ended up in a emergency room. And the doctor, who was an orthopedic surgeon, was saying to me, like, we might need to give you a spinal fusion. And yeah. And you can only imagine, like, as someone who had been at that point teaching yoga for pretty much 25 years, who thought that they had some knowledge of the human body, who was teaching other people how to live their best life through quote unquote stretching and these, yogic quote unquote style exercises. This was a huge blow to my ego. It was very devastating. And it was very devastating also just to kind of look at, like, what have I been doing for the last 25 years? And so that propelled me into, of course, becoming the student, humbling myself and asking the question, why? And that kind of in a roundabout way took me to a methodology called muscle activation technique, which was discovered or created by Greg Roskoff. And I could go into a long litany of how great he is and his sort of history, but it kind of distills into one question. What is the source of muscle tightness? Recognizing that muscle tightness is not good. Why are muscles tight? And so Greg just observed that the conventional wisdom and the conventional practices of quote unquote stretching these tight muscles wasn't working. In fact, what he found was that it was making muscles weaker. That when you actually stretch a muscle, it makes it weaker, not stronger. No matter how
Mm.
many times people like to try and spin it, every single time it will make the muscle weaker. So, having that kind of knowledge, I started studying with Greg muscle activation technique. And my big question was, how do I translate this into the yoga world? Because nobody in the muscle activation technique world was doing this at sort of a group level as a group class, which was my, the lane that I run in mostly. Muscle activation technique was more of a one-on-one, obviously, kind of therapy, like you go see a chiropractor for an
Mhm.
adjustment. And so I just started getting interested in how do I translate this into yoga. And then step by step, I brought it into my studio, really for my own students, in my own teacher trainings that I was leading. And then I quickly saw that people were becoming pain free, which I knew was going to happen, but to have it like show up that bluntly in your face, like, oh my God, people by day 6 to day 10 were healing chronic injuries.
Mm.
And it just blew me away. And then I thought, I have to start sharing this information on a larger scale, number one. But number two, that for years now, I've been sort of kind of sitting back and just kind of watching what's happening in the yoga worlds and kind of feeling like, okay, I have my little corner. I'll just keep teaching. But what I think what's really kind of tipped me over the edge is when I got into muscle activation technique, I really started to see how little yoga teachers know. Like, we're really good at disguising our faults and our ignorance behind a really rich tradition of knowledge. And when I say we're good at hiding our ignorance, it's like we're good at hiding the fact that we really don't know anything about the human body. And it's kind
Mhm.
of embarrassing. And so I just decided we need to flip the script. And I am so tired of yoga teachers saying things like, we've got to open the hips, or we have to open our hamstrings, or we have to open the shoulder girdle. It's like, when people say things like that, it perpetuates an ignorance, and or that we need to discover the full expression of this posture. There is no reference in the yoga tradition of stretching, that we have to go deeper into pose. There's just nothing. All it says is that we should practice yoga postures with a perfection of stillness and joy. Which is the complete opposite of what we see happening in a lot of yoga studios these days.
Yes, because I will tell you that I went to yoga for years and I came out of that class worse and worse and worse till finally I
Yeah.
couldn't do it anymore. And I was always somebody that was against stretching because when I
Yep.
stretched, I felt worse. And so why am I going to do something that I feel the worst? And even my husband, like people close to me would be like, "You're not going to stretch before you play tennis? You're not going to stretch?" Like, no, because I play worse when I stretch first. So I would do like movements and I would warm up, but
Yep.
not necessarily stretch. And then once that happened to me with the yoga, I ended up in physical therapy, like you. My
Yes.
whole healing journey is a huge rabbit hole, so I won't get into it, but now I feel like I do a lot more stretching. So when you approached
Yep.
me with this, I was like, okay, I need to know more.
Can I just add something though, Jazzy,
Yes,
that
please.
I so I don't know if this is your experience. My first thing I wanted to ask you was like, so did you feel shame for not being a better quote unquote yoga student? And I just had like this, he's like 70 years old, I think. This man from Norway just messaged me and he stumbled across my book, Stop Stretching, last December. Just stumbled across it. I guess it was like an Amazon recommended or something like that. And he got my book and he says, "Oh my God, this is what I have been looking for." And then he proceeded to tell me his whole journey in yoga, and something kept pulling him back into yoga, and this is kind of what I'm trying to flip the script on, is we have moved so far away from what yoga's intention is, which is about the building up of our self confidence. This is just a really, I'm kind of downplaying it a little bit, but the building up of our self confidence and indomitable willpower so we can go out to manifest and live our life purpose. That's what
Yeah.
yoga is. And that's something to get excited about. But he kept going to yoga, and he was like me at 18, where he had really tight hamstrings, tight body, and he literally, not only did he go to yoga classes and like feel like crap, but then he got shamed by several teachers, like in horrible ways that just, when he told me this story, I was like, I cannot believe this is happening out there, but it does.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people feel that kind of shame, that they keep stretching and they don't get those, like, oh my god, I can't do a certain pose because I'm not flexible enough, after years and years and years. And again, we just don't address really what are the causes of muscle tightness. And so that's where I come in. I'm all about, like, okay, the body tightness is telling us something, that there's an instability, and we need to address that instability, in order to open up range of motion.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. To answer your question, yes, I felt shamed. And it's at a certain point, my yoga teacher, which I adored, but she didn't know any better, right? She would adjust me into positions that I could not hold, and it was
Yeah.
straining me. And then I felt really embarrassed because she would literally tell me to relax or to like go deeper. And it's like, I physically cannot, this hurts. Like, so it was a
Yes.
really interesting experience. It was a learning opportunity for me, but also I just basically gave up on yoga. But I read things like I'm a Reiki master, and there are several poses that you can do to be able to open up several chakras or to cleanse several chakras. And I'm like, God, I really wish I could go back into my yoga practice. But
Yeah.
it sounds like I just need to find the right teacher.
Well, I have a lot of great videos out there that you could follow and do.
Yay. I will definitely check it out. I will definitely check it out.
I have a lot of free content out there. So I would just invite you to check some of it out. And again, it's just that, yoga teachers that are teaching this flexibility business are just really ignorant. um they don't understand the energetics of a pose, and I'll give you a quick example of that. Like you just said, like, you want to feel the heart chakra opening up. So if you bring your arms out like this to the sides and just lift your chest, that's going to have an enormous, beautiful effect on the heart chakra. And now, if we breathe in and out, just there, and then we imbibe a mantra, for example, maybe the bija sound of the mantra, the heart chakra, which is yum, and we just inhale yum, 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 yum. Okay, so that's going to start having this profound resonance in the heart center, where a lot of yoga teachers' ignorance leads them into, like, telling people to do things like, okay, now we have to go do wheel pose to open up the heart center. If that's the only way to open up the heart center, are you kidding me?
Oh my God. Oh my
Which, by the
goodness.
way, wheel pose is going to have very little effect on the heart center, because most people go up into wheel with a lot of ego, which is the exact opposite of what the heart center is about. So, sorry, you're going into wheel is not really going to be effective, for most people.
Yeah, I hear that. And that simple move I just did with you,
Yes.
I could feel it. It really
Yes.
created a shift. I could even feel it in my face, like I see it in my face as well. So
You're
that
more
was
joyful.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
was
was having
actually,
after 2 o'clock, you kind of like your energy kind of goes down. And I wanted to go get a tea, but I was like, no, I'll just stick with water. And that like just gave me a little bit of a recharge.
yes, yes.
I love it. So I want to get a little bit deeper on this. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the prevalent misconceptions about stretching and how can they negatively impact us?
So one of the negative or one of the prevalent misconceptions about stretching is like you're going to be younger, you're going to be more healthy, and stretching really does the complete opposite. And I'll tell you why. So the best way to explain it is like there's a telephone line between your brain and your muscles. And so that telephone line is the nervous system. And so there's constant, well, in an ideal situation, there's constant communication going back between the two. The nervous system senses when the muscle should contract, and so it sends a message to the muscle contract. And so when the muscle, like say for example, you bend forwards, all of a sudden what should be happening is all of your abdominal muscles should be shortening. And so one of the things that most yoga teachers, and I would actually even say like gym trainers, fitness trainers, and to a large degree, a lot of physical therapists also forget this rule. And it's a very simple rule that we all learned in grade school. Was a couple of there's a couple of rules around muscle function, but one of them is muscles move bones and muscles stabilize joints. And they do that by shortening. So when I'm folding forward to pick up something off the floor, all of my muscles in my core should be contracting, should be
Hmm.
shortening. And it shortens for two reasons. One, so that my trunk and spine can, bend forward. And then two, to stabilize the joints in my back, which is the vertebrae. And so, how many times do you hear stories of people they bend over to pick something silly up, or they bent over or just slightly bent over to pick up that bag of groceries from the car, and then all of a sudden their back seizes up. Well, why did it seize up? Because the muscles in the front of the body, the major trunk flexor muscles, were not working properly. The back doesn't have stability. All of a sudden other muscles start taking over that have no business in
Hmm.
stabilizing the trunk and spine in that range of motion, and then the body tightens up. So the body tightens up as a result of instability. The body tightens up as a protective mechanism to stabilize a joint. Unfortunately, it's really painful when that happens. When we stretch, what we're doing is we're causing more stress in that communication system. There's that communication, that telephone line. And to be quite blunt, it's like taking a pair of gardening shears and literally cutting that telephone line between the muscle and the nervous system, the central nervous system. So if we stretch, we're pushing a muscle beyond what its capacity is, either the capacity to lengthen, but what we often don't talk about enough is the opposite muscle, the muscles that are shortening. So if you, for example, have your legs stretched out in front of you and you grab a strap or a band or something, you put it around your feet and you start pulling forward. Well, the muscles that are responsible for pulling you forward, aka your trunk flexors and your hip flexors, let's put it in terms that most of your listeners can understand. Your six pack or eight pack. So the eight pack is one of the trunk flexors, and then of course your quads. Your quads need to shorten in order for you to come forward. But if you use an outside force like a strap or a band to pull you forward, now you're forcing all of those muscles to shorten beyond what they can do. So in your mind, you're thinking, oh, I'm stretching my hamstrings. But what you're actually doing as well is you're forcing those muscles to shorten beyond what their end range of shortening capacity is. So in this way, you cut off that connection between the brain and the muscle. And if there's any kind of science geeks out there listening to this conversation, the correct term is proprioception. So there's this proprioception that happens between the brain, if you will, and the muscles. And there's a constant communication. When you stretch, that proprioception is immediately cut off. And it's also fair to say that there's where the muscle connects to the bone, there's like this sensitivity that happens. That sensitivity is what triggers this between the brain and the muscles. That sensitivity actually becomes dull, it becomes
Mm.
numb. And so I don't think that we want to be walking around with numbed bodies. And that's what stretching does, is that it literally makes us physiologically numb.
That makes a lot of sense. Is it too late for somebody that's been stretching for 20 plus years?
Never. You can flip the script. Obviously, with someone who's had a little bit more stress and trauma in their life, I think about myself when I ended up in the surgeon's office. I was able to turn it around. Before that, I was never hiking. After I had that stint, I decided I'm going to get myself strong enough to go hiking without my knee brace, without
Mm.
support, without having to take, 5 Advil at the end of it. And I would say in many ways, not in all ways, but in many ways, I'm a lot stronger today than I ever have been because I'm not constantly dealing with chronic pain flare ups. I'm not dealing with a back that seizes up the moment I bend forward to pick the toothpaste up off of my bathroom counter to, brush my teeth. I just like there's just so many areas where my I would have problems and I just don't have those problems anymore. So I'm a lot stronger today than I was. But if you are
Mhm.
someone that has had a history of trauma, it takes a little bit more time. And what I have to say to those people is, A, don't give up. Um, B, remember it's a process. You're learning how to use your body. You have a lot of bad habits. Like there's a couple of students of mine that I keep yelling at because they keep crossing their legs. And I'm like, don't sit with your legs crossed. And so there's all of these like stressors that we have in our life too. And so from our perspective, what we're trying to do is get our systems stronger so that we can handle the stressors of life and not be beaten down all the time.
Yeah. No, that's really encouraging. I appreciate you
Yes.
sharing your story there also. So for somebody that is recognizing this in themselves, that they've been stretching for a really long time and it's getting worse and worse, what would you recommend? Where can they get started?
So for someone who's been stretching for a long time, the first thing is stop stretching. Get my book. And then the second thing is I would there's a couple of places people can go, but I would definitely encourage people to check out my YouTube channel, check out I have so much free content out there. Of course, it kind of guides people to either do a training with me, to come and hang out with me in Costa Rica, or do one of the online trainings, but at least start with something. I have a 7-day pain-free series. It's free. People can get tapped into that, and it just part of my big thing is just to educate people as much as I can and as much as they're willing to about how their body works and why they might be experiencing pain, and then to show them simple, easy, digestible things that they can do to get the muscles of their body working. And when people start doing that, Jazzy, it happens very quick. So much stress in the body, so much pain, sorry, in the body as a result of stress.
Mhm.
And the result of stress is inflammation, which is the pain. And that stress is happening because people's muscles aren't working properly, aka they're not stabilizing joints. So the joints are compromised and then they get stressed and then inflammation. Once we get the muscles working, it happens like that. People's inflammation goes down, people's pain goes down, and then people start having more mobility. So I would suggest that people just tap into the information. I'm going to be starting soon an AYAMA directory so that people can access different AYAMA yoga teachers around the country.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm going to be keeping up and doing all this kind of thing so people can just get plugged in, and you can get plugged into a person. Another option too for people is to find a muscle activation technique therapist where they live, and that person can start putting them back together again.
I
No, it's a
love it.
real story. One of my dearest and best friends since I was 14 years old, his wife has been a mess, just a mess, and most of her life. But recently, she can barely walk. She was wearing orthotics, and I referred her to a muscle activation technique therapist in Vancouver, which is where she's from. And after the last time I saw her, which was about, it was about 2 months after working with this guy, she said, "Today is day 10 without me wearing my orthotics on my feet." And I was like dumbfounded. Like, to say, "Oh yeah, I haven't worn them for 10 days and I feel fabulous." And she was standing really tall. Last time I saw her, she looked like an old woman. This is like a 48-year-old woman. She looked like an old woman. She was all hunched over. She was standing erect. She was standing with confidence, and just was emanating a lot of great energy as well. But from what I saw, she was like standing really strong, and I was just completely blown away, like how what a difference it makes when we get our muscular system working properly.
I believe it. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yes,
To not wear that for 10 days, that's a
yes,
huge deal. That's
yes.
amazing. I love that story. And I know it's possible because, for myself, I had fibromyalgia for a really long time. And you're right, the inflammation is what gets you.
Yes.
And, I was wearing braces and all these other things. And it wasn't until I started like movement again, it was just sheer movement that I needed to do because I was at my computer 15 hours a day, no breaks, no nothing. I was very embedded in my like corporate career. And for what? Like I was like 35 years old and I felt like I was like 70. It
Yeah.
was nuts. So I believe that, once you find what works for you, and it sounds like muscle activation is something for us to look into, it changes lives.
Yes, absolutely.
So changing a deep-seated belief, especially in a community as established as yoga, must have had its own challenges. The stuff that you're talking about here is very controversial in the yoga world.
Yes.
So, how has your message been received by other yogis and, instructors? Have you faced any resistance?
Yeah, just recently in my recent training, I don't know how this person ended up in my training not knowing who I was, but she completely feigned ignorance by like day 3 or 4 or something. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And it was interesting having some conversations with her. Like, there's about, I would say, 30 to 50% of people just don't either get it, don't want to get it. And that's and then some people get really upset with me. And quite frankly, I'm getting to the point now where it doesn't bother me to poke the bear anymore. Like before I was kind of like tap dancing around it. But I think, you know, one of let me just say this before I continue, that at a biomechanical level, when our body is tightening up, that tightening up is a protective mechanism. And, it's our body going into a protective state. And so when we're teaching stretching, it's basically what we're teaching students to do is to violate their own body's protective mechanism. And that's really hard for a lot of yoga teachers to hear, I think, and even yoga people, because they want to believe that the stretching is actually a healing, but it's not. It's violating the body's own protective mechanism. Not only is it violating, but it's actually engendering more tightness. It's engendering more instability, and so it's going to create even more protective mechanisms. And I find that interesting because in the yoga world, you hear so much about safe spaces, for example. And how can you create a safe space if you're teaching people to violate their own protective mechanisms?
Mhm.
So I finally, some people really get it. And those are the people that get it, like you, who had a feeling that something wasn't right here. Or I just had this one woman email me. She sent a really long email. Literally, this landed in my box yesterday. And she was going on to me about how happy she was that she came across my information. Unfortunately, she had just finished her 200-hour yoga teacher training, which she wanted to also add was really great. And it really focused on the energetics of poses, which is great, but it had nothing in there about biomechanical stuff. It had nothing in there about anatomy. But even more so, by the end of the training, she left the training with enormous hip pain. And this kind of like really breaks my heart because I find like, I don't believe for a second that yoga teachers want to harm people. I really don't. I think they really do want to help. But unfortunately, some yoga teachers are very adamant and set in their ways. And I believe that a lot of yoga teachers are starting to ask that question, like there's got to be something more than this. Like I can't hang out in this hip opener for 5-10 minutes and then
Mhm.
end up with hip pain an hour later. Like this doesn't, why is this happening to me? And
Right.
so I think that people are starting to have that kind of inner wisdom to realize that what they're doing is not really serving them, that they're still having the same issues. I often get asked this question. This is kind of going off topic, but it's sort of not that, people ask me about foam rolling.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Aaron, what do you think about foam rolling? And I say, well, take a look at those people that are doing foam rolling. They're still doing foam rolling, meaning that it doesn't solve the problem. And
Yeah,
and so a lot of people that have to stretch are still stretching because their problem hasn't been resolved. The muscle tightness is still there, the pain is still there. And until we deal with that tightness, then the body is going to revert into a protective state all the time.
I agree. Yeah. And I think also part of that resistance, you kind of alluded to it earlier when you had been a yoga instructor and in the yoga world for 25 years. That's a really hard reality to admit. Like everything that I've lived my life by is totally wrong. And to invite something new can be hard, right?
Yeah, I mean, I before I ended up in the hospital, even I started to get glimpses into this idea that stretching was not good and that I needed. And so by even before then, I was backing off on certain things that I was teaching. Um, but I was still teaching stretching. I mean, admittedly, but part of one of my biggest issues was, and this is kind of like the dirty little secret in the yoga world, that I think we don't admit enough of, is like if I'm not teaching stretching, then how am I going to teach yoga? And that question really was hard one for me to accept or digest. And
Mhm.
it took me a few years to answer that question. Like, and then I realized that's how come I came up with the phrase we need to flip the script, is like I needed to flip the script in my own head. I
Yeah.
can still teach yoga. I don't have to teach stretching.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I want to talk a little bit about your retreat down in Costa Rica.
Yes.
How or what can visitors expect as an experience? What is different in the experience there compared to other yoga retreats?
Sorry. Um, well, first of all, I think a lot of places call themselves yoga retreats, and they're not yoga retreats. They're more like hotels that have a yoga platform or something. And so I just want to just say that right off the bat. I think what separates us, and there are a lot of wonderful other yoga retreats out there, obviously. That's why I got inspired to build mine. I think what sets us apart from, I'll just say, other yoga retreats, but other also destinations, is that we really embody as much as we're able to within a, you know, a yoga spa, beach resort kind of setting, a yoga tradition. So there's a few things like that we do. We play on the loudspeaker the morning prayers, the Himalayan chants in the morning, so that people kind of can, for a moment, tune in. And one of the other things, another thing that we do, which kind of sets us apart, is that we actually practice morning silence. So
Mm.
there's no talking at our place until 7:30, usually in the morning. And of course, then we have a yoga program, and the whole place is just really conducive to a yoga retreat. There's nothing around us. Town is about 11 kilometers, 8 miles away, and and we just have this beach in front of our place that spans about 3 miles long. So there's just nothing but stillness and emptiness at our
Mm.
place, filled with enormous beauty. The rainforest animals, oftentimes you'll see 4 species of monkeys circling our property, not in a dangerous way. I just realized when I said circling, that doesn't sound good, but hanging out around our property. And we have like scarlet macaws and birds. And so there's, it's like when in the yoga tradition, and I think in many spiritual traditions, we talk about the importance of nature and how Gaia, Mother Nature, speaks to us. In Blue Osa, you can hear Gaia speaking to you very clearly.
That's incredible. I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And you have several books, a podcast, a YouTube channel, and a retreat already under your belt. What's next for Yogi Aaron?
I am working on, I feel like my dharma right now is to get this conversation going about the not stop stretching thing. But if I'm honest, it's really about something much deeper. There's so much confusion in the world right now about, just people are confused about what they believe, what they should believe, what direction they're going. People are confused about their purpose in life. Um, and the confusion in the yoga scriptures, it's referred to this word called tamas. Tamas refers to like this heaviness. People are carrying this heaviness in their mind, and that heaviness stops us from thinking clearly, from seeing life clearly. And that's really the promise of yoga, is like, how do we remove this, if you want to use this word, fog in our mind? And a lot of that fog comes from pain, literally pain, like physical pain, not psychological pain. That's not my lane. I deal more in the physical. And but what I have seen time and time again is that when people feel lighter in their body, they feel lighter in life, and that fog just starts to lift. And so I'm on the bandwagon to help people, be able to feel the lightness of life. There's one of my favorite scriptures um, says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And it's a reminder to, we don't have to walk through life heavy. Our birthright is to walk through life light and easy. And it doesn't mean that life will always be easy. No, we'll face challenges, but if we can approach it from that place of lightness, um, then we can have a much different experience on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you so much. I want to thank you for being on the show today and enlightening us with your wisdom. This has been a fabulous conversation. I'm going to actually link all of your your website, your YouTube channel, all of that down below. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. Let us know what you thought about this episode down below. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. We would really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.